I have a quick question. Do you know how much platinum there is in the world?
I've no idea.
It will only cover your ankles in a Olympic-sized swimming pool.
Good heavens.
No. Welcome to Watches of Switzerland. I'm Faye Soteri, International Senior Watch Buyer, and today I'm joined by watch journalist, acting editor-in-chief of Wallpaper magazine, and longtime friend of Watches of Switzerland, Bill Prince.
Thank you, Faye, for that introduction. That's very kind.
Oh, my pleasure. We've recently done a video cast and some work on complications and what goes on inside the watches in this wonderful industry of horology that we have. And I thought we could talk about the external, the metals, what materials primarily watches are made from, what the most popular watch types are. We're going to focus a bit more on precious metal and combination pieces. And I'd like to talk about why brands feel they need to enhance the timepiece by making it out of elite metal, precious metal, and enhancing it with gems potentially. If you think it enhances the functionality of a watch, is precious metal a signifier to either the client or the brand? And how brands really push the boundaries with unique or fusion materials. So if we could talk about some of those
today. Well, that's a lot of ground to cover. Should we begin?
Absolutely. You and I had a brief conversation and we were talking about mixed metal and bimetal watches previously.
Well, it's very interesting, and thank you for that introduction. It's set up in my own mind why we're here to talk about materials. We talk about models a lot. We talk about movements a lot. You and Mark were discussing complications in an earlier video, but really materials is the third leg on the stool, so to speak. It's the third defining element of the watch we choose to wear. And I suppose we started this conversation around bimetal, which we see generationally trends come and go. Bimetal was, when we say bimetal, of course, we mean a blend of steel and yellow or rose gold, but it doesn't necessarily have to involve either of those. It's the combination of two materials, and they tend to be elite materials outside of steel. But bimetal is coming back in that sort of generational trend shift that we see around us all the time. The 80s are now top dollar in terms of fashion, and bimetal watches were very popular in the 80s. Obviously, they were predated by almost half a century. Watchmakers have been blending metals in watches since watches were made, but particularly from the Art Deco era in the 20s and 30s onwards, particularly at Cartier. But fundamentally, the bimetal watch we were discussing is that throwback to the 80s, when they represented, as you described it, almost staging posts between the traditional stainless steel watch and what we would regard as a fine timepiece in gold, which was traditionally held as being the ultimate wristwatch to own. And it's why legend has it, I've never seen it, when you worked in a particular company for many years, you may be gifted a gold watch. And that was the ultimate. That's what a watch should be, and that's when you got a gold one. And obviously, as we saw in the 80s, money started to move around a lot more quickly. A lot of younger people got hold of money a lot earlier in life. And that generational shift created a desire to own a watch that sort of telegraphed the attributes of a gold watch without being the gold watch of your retirement. And I think that's what fed into the bimetal craze in the 80s. Obviously, a lot of brands investing into the development of these pieces. But we're here to talk about a much broader set of materials than simply bimetal. And I think what has been one of the great engaging stories of the last 10 or 20 years has been the role of materials in particularly case making. And as we'll talk about a little later on, that's now fed into bracelet design, and also the materials that are used in bracelets and straps, which is moving a new era of materials. And obviously what we'll talk about a little later on is how these materials themselves are changing and how their fabrication is changing as we move into an era that is very reflective of sustainability and upcycling and recycling of product.